Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this Techstrong learning experience brought to you by AWS and Aqua. My name is Cody, and I'm the host of Techstrong Learning. We have an exciting presentation ahead. Before we get this panel kicked off, I do have just a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to review. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude this live session today. If you'd like to engage with us, there are a couple of options to do so. The first of which is the chat tab, which you can find on the right side of your screen. I'd like you to go ahead and start testing that functionality out for us right now. Let us know where you're joining us. I know we have a global audience and we'd like to get a sense of where everyone's coming from. If you have any questions, we do suggest you send those into the Q&A panel. It just helps us keep them organized. You can find that directly to the right of the chat tab. If you click on where it says handouts, you'll see there are a couple of resources that have been uploaded, so feel free to grab those. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around for the duration of our program today. So our topic is implementing Zero Trust Security, a comprehensive guide for cloud-native environments. And I'm joined by a panel of experts today. Chris Wise, DevSecOps Architect at Aqua Security. Rob Hale, Principal of EMES Security Segment Leader at AWS. Malcolm Taylor, Cyber DevSecOps at Lloyd's Banking Group. And moderating our conversation today, we have Joe Murphy from Aqua. So Chris, Rob, Malcolm, thank you so much for joining us. Joe, do you want to go ahead and get this conversation rolling?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Cody. And welcome, everyone. Hope you're enjoying your days. So hi again, everyone. My name is Joe Murphy with Aqua, and today we're going to have some fun talking about Zero Trust. As Cody said, with me today, 3 experts who will be sharing their insights, their experiences along the journey to achieving Zero Trust. By the end of this session, we really hope that you'll have a better understanding of how Zero Trust works, what it is, how it can help you secure your organization and your most critical assets. And we really hope that you walk away with some actionable insights for taking that first step. Trust us, the water is warm in Zero Trust, so don't hesitate to jump in. Let's keep this conversational. So please submit your questions, your comments, your concerns in the chat, as it really does make for a great discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to pass things over to Rob. Rob, just to set the table, and then we'll dive into some deeper panel introductions.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. So we're really here to talk around, with our peers around Zero Trust. It's a big subject. There's loads of buzzwords. We're going to try and avoid some of those, or at least qualify them into something that's useful. And we'll try and focus in on best practice and real world advice and experience versus the more marketing-y phrases, etc., that we see bandied around. And we're going to keep this really, really interactive as much as possible. So please do put any questions you have into the chat. We will reserve at least the last 15 minutes just for your questions, and then for the panelists as well. Just feel free to input as the conversation evolves, just to make sure this is interactive. So I'll start with an introduction with myself. I'm Rob Hale. For the past 5 years, I've led AWS's security partner business in EMEA. So I basically glue together our partner strategy between our technology partners, consulting partners, and MSSPs with customer use cases, so we can ensure that customers are secure and are able to innovate at a rapid pace. And I'll hand over to Malcolm.
Yeah, hi, I'm Malcolm Taylor. I've worked for Lloyd's Banking Group. We're a heavy consumer of Aqua and consume cloud platforms like AWS, but also other clouds, as you might expect. I've been working at Lloyd's on Aqua for the last 4 years. We've implemented Aqua across our cloud platforms and utilising it fairly heavily, using the workload protection aspects.
Awesome. Thanks, Malcolm. And Chris?
Yeah, so my name is Chris Wise. I'm a DevSecOps architect in Aqua. Effectively, we work within customer success and have the joy of working with customers like Malcolm on really getting the most out of the Aqua product, not just in terms of what it does, but how you embed it in your organization from a DevSecOps perspective, and obviously talking about cool topics like Zero Trust. My background is actually development a long time ago, and then moved into cloud and cloud security architecture and DevOps within the last 8 years, I guess, working across all the clouds, but obviously predominantly AWS, because why wouldn't you?
Thanks, Chris, Rob, Malcolm. So everybody seems to have a different definition of what Zero Trust is. At least offline, we were, having some fun just discussing the different definitions. So curious to hear from you guys, your individual perspectives on the topic, and let's come to a consensus as a group here with our audience to provide a little context for the further discussion. So Malcolm, I would love to start with you here, your perspective on the matter.
Yeah, from a customer's perspective, consumer perspective, since we've gone into public cloud, it's meant our boundaries have changed. Previously, we're all internal data center class applications, infrastructure, etc. Now moving into public cloud and the interactions between those clouds, SaaS environments, private servers, means we have to expand our boundaries, and then using Zero Trust principles, we need to understand who is who. So from a user perspective, from an application perspective as well, how do we prevent someone something getting into our applications, our data, and even if someone managed to get into it, how do we minimize that blast radius, prevent people getting to our crown jewels, as we call it.
Someone in the chat said, total control chaos at times. True that.
I like that.
Rob, how about you?
Yeah, so there's, it's one of those phrases that's actually, turned into a buzzword quite a lot in the security industry, and we do that, worryingly well sometimes. But Zero Trust is all around good security principles. Let's roll it back to not providing static controls that are just based on a single binary choice. Do you have access or do you don't have access? So officially, if there is an official definition, it's a conceptual security model. So it's use an associated set of mechanisms that focus around those security controls and apply them to digital assets. But they don't fundamentally depend on just network controls or network perimeters. And that's really, really important because Malcolm's just pointed out, with Lloyd's and pretty much any organization that isn't, born in the cloud, you're going to have multiple environments. And so you need to have security controls that are consistent across all those different environments. It's no good having, awesome security controls over here in the cloud or on-prem and not having those elsewhere. So you can paraphrase all that by saying, essentially it's security controls that are agnostic to your location in the network. And that begins with knowing what you're trying to protect.
Chris, you want to round us out?
Yeah, I'll try to do my best following those two very good explanations or definitions of what Zero Trust is. I guess from the Aqua side, we have we talk about it as being this big thing, but when you boil it down, it's just a set of principles that you can apply to security, whether that's networking, IAM, or the layer that we really operate at. Well, we do touch on networking. Officially, we're all about application Zero Trust, supply chain, what you're running in your workloads, access to those workloads and how those workloads interact with each other, and building up those rules to make sure that you've got both visibility and can actually restrict how things are interacting with each other. And reducing that blast radius, to go back to Malcolm's point, that's key. It's fundamental to Zero Trust. It's almost easier than the traditional building a big wall around your infrastructure, whether that's on-prem or cloud. Obviously, the introduction of public cloud has made it more complex because there's more walls to build. But actually just assume that everything could be potentially breached. And when you start looking at security from that perspective, it almost simplifies things because you stop, no matter how big a wall you build, there will be holes. So start building lots of little walls instead around everything. That's how I like to view it anyway. But definitely interested to hear, anyone's other views on that, how they're applying it in their organization or how they think on it.
Yeah, drop that.
Actually, yeah. So there's a really good insight in the chat from one of our participants on actually, just the responsibility for security, is everybody's in the cloud, and actually that's the same on-prem as well. And so security culture has got to be a key kind of foundational stone to any zero trust implementation. If you haven't got that security culture and ownership of security within stakeholders, so the application owners and business owners, then you're going to need to start to bring them in as stakeholders for any project that's got as much scope as you could go down to with zero trust. So I think that's a really important point to make. It's not just about technology controls, around policy and people.
Another good one came in too. Asset detection and data classification should be a starting point. So that's an awesome segue into our next portion of the talk today. So we've got a good understanding of what zero trust is. So now let's explore some practical first steps that one can take to start your journey to achieving zero trust in a little bit more detail. So Malcolm, so individual is interested in taking the path along the journey to zero trust, but might feel a little overwhelmed by all the layers and the complexity. I mean, just at a high level, if you look at, one of the diagrams, it's definitely overwhelming. In your experience, what should folks be prioritizing? What are some milestones to work towards as you consider taking that first step?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it before, but especially in the chat, but asset and data classification, big one. So I guess it's understanding what you want to protect, and if you want to protect everything, great, fantastic. But going back to I think my earlier point, if it does get compromised, can it get through to other systems, applications, data, things that can kind of compromise your business? If you want to protect everything, do you want to protect? What's your level of protection? Do you want to go higher on certain things than before? That kind of thing. It's striking a balance between how secure you want to be compared to how productive, how usable you want your systems to be. If you're overly secure, you might not be able to do anything. It might be you might be trying to get an application in that brings in £1 million a day to your business, but if you apply security controls that excessive security controls, I'd guess, say you want to protect, you don't want any vulnerabilities in your organization, for example, that might prevent that £1 million application coming into your business. So it's striking that balance between security and productivity and usability. To do that, make it easier for, I guess, application teams, engineers, your organization. You can put in guardrails to say you want to allow, but you want to allow a certain aspect and deviation from the course, but within guardrails, guidelines. So you don't want it to expand out, expand out of certain patterns that you've created for zero trust perspective. Those patterns could be something simple as an IAM. Well, that's not very simple, but you must use this tool to perform privileged access management, for example, that kind of thing. How to consume that tool. Those patterns could be reused, updated, reissued cross cloud. That's the big thing from our perspective. If you want to consume multiple clouds in your organization, do you start on one cloud, or do you do them all together but have a certain pattern that you can apply across cloud? There's obviously nuances between AWS, GCP, Azure, etc. But the core services are pretty much the same. If you think about it, using tools like Aqua, you can it's platform independent. So it doesn't matter if it's protecting a workload on GCP or protecting a workload on Azure. You can apply the same security principles there. And that's what we've done as an organization, trying to keep it simple.
Keeping it simple is key. And I think that's probably the crux of my job, is working with Aqua customers to try and break things down and keep it simple, and being pragmatic with security time and time again. And this isn't just a zero trust, this is just security in general, that, you know, the dev team will build an application, security don't get a sight of it until it's ready to be deployed into production, and then suddenly start hammering down on, no, you can't do that. And okay, the time to delivery of that app, you know, for new features goes from days, hours to weeks and months. So embedding security and zero trust into the whole process is the key to that. And those patterns and practices and guardrails are essential to, you know, you've got a way of doing things. And once you fathom that out in a cloud, just take that pattern and repeat it across applications and teams. And that's what makes it easier. But I'm not saying it's easy to get to that point, but, you know, start on that journey. Small bite-sized chunks.
I'll walk around. Chris, we were talking a little bit about adding automation into the mix, steps that you could take to remove user access. Do you want to dive a little into that?
Yeah, and actually this kind of has some parallels with one of the questions that came in the chat. Is zero trust the bridge to support comfortable migration towards cloud, especially for government agencies? Prior to joining Aqua, I actually did a bit of time in UK government projects. It was an AWS cloud migration, and zero trust was great because it was a greenfield project. It was moving services from data centers into AWS, kind of a lift and improve rather than lift and shift. It's definitely a preferred approach. But the standpoint was taken that, okay, how do we take these sensitive services into the cloud and be confident in the security? And zero trust was the answer to that at every level. So, you know, IAM identity is one of the trickier challenges to solve, through to application, data, everything. And one of my kind of recommendations to customers is, one of the kind of guiding lights is, how do you get to a point where you are hands-off in production? And that's a combination of privileged access management, observability. You know, if you have devs that, you know, you're always going to have bugs, you can have errors that need investigating. If someone needs to start execing into containers in production or onto servers in production, then there is a hole that needs to be filled in terms of observability. And that's a really good stepping stone. So if you know, working towards hands-off in production and building out all the tool chain and tools that you need in order to get there, you kind of start ticking off some of these big ticket items on that zero trust journey. So yeah, observability is key. That's a combination of just outputting your observability of errors, tracing, but also what's happening in runtime, which is where obviously Aqua's forte, that shift right runtime protection, getting complete visibility of any incidents or behaviors that are happening on the host and container runtime, all mean that you can work towards not having to have people digging through running workloads in prod, which is never a good idea.
Actually, that was a really interesting point you made, Chris, around you know, kind of enabling developers, and Malcolm, you made it as well, around having guardrails. And I think that's really, really super critical for when you're moving at pace and you want to shift left in terms of, sorry, it's another buzzword, but move your security engagement and ownership left into the development cycle, because no one wants to be that red line. You know, my view on this is that if security is engaged at project completion and you're the red line audit that has to go on before that solution goes live, then it's kind of a failure of security. Because what you really need to be doing is you need to be engaged at conceptual stage to get set the right concepts and the right ownership for security, and that will go through. It's around process and culture, which then means you have a faster outcome that's by default secure. And then when you're looking at observability, you're really monitoring exceptions to your policy. You're not having to look at the whole thing all the time and constantly assess, you know, has somebody done something silly here? For speed, If you make it easy with guardrails, then developers will typically take the easy route, because why would you build something from scratch that's probably not going to pass that bar at the end and cause you issues, if you have the opportunity to build something that's ready-made, already complies with security policy, and will mean a tick box exercise to get you get your application live and running with users.
Love to see all the activity in the chat, everyone. So thank you. Please keep them coming. There's a question that just came in that I think we should probably prioritize here. So the balance is security prioritization of the business. The whole idea to limit the damage or preventing lateral movement, not about if, is when. Oh, it's not about if, it's about when. Is that the right chord to strike?
Yeah, definitely. Assume breach. So it's not a case of if, it is definitely when it happens. And if you already assume that you are compromised in some way and are building in, defense in depth, or the right controls that would, mean that the blast radius of that is as limited as possible, or if not impossible. One of the features of Aqua that is little used is image profiling, because people, you deploy a host or a container. Let's say that's Debian, Ubuntu, whatever. There's a whole heap of tools in there that can be used to move laterally and explore your infrastructure, even at Netcat. It's probably not a container in the world that doesn't have Netcat, or curl or wget. People can start exploring, start moving around. Why run those things if you don't need to? Image profiling locks that down. And so, that's zero trust. You're only trusting your services to run the things that they need to do their job and nothing more. And that is absolutely the bottom line of zero trust.
So it's also understanding what's like you say, what's in your image, how you can strip everything down to the bare minimum, and then also knowing exactly who you need to speak to, strip as well. So stripping down your asset. We know from last year from our organisation, Log4, was it last year or the year before, Log4, when Log4j vulnerability came out, quite a few of our labs and engineering teams didn't know they were using Log4j. A lot did, but quite a few didn't. So it's knowing within your applications, within your engineering teams, what packages, what resources you're consuming in your applications that you do on your day-to-day job is a key thing for us.
Yeah, and make a good point there. Goes back to one of the earlier points about asset detection and data classification. Ownership is key, and understanding. It was one of the challenges we see with a lot of customers is that they've gone into cloud, they've got lots of teams deploying in the way they want to, and actually if you find an issue or a compromise, how do you find who actually owns that? So asset detection, classification is critical. And I know that's something that Lloyds do very well.
We try to.
You try to.
The $1 million question just came into the chat. I think if more and more Log4js pop their head out of the woodwork, this would be a pretty easy sell. But to the panel, what's the best approach to selling zero trust to the C-suite?
Yeah, so I'll give a 1,000-foot view of that. Don't try and sell a security, a really complicated security concept to the C-suite without knowing what the business benefits are, the objectives are, how it supports their objectives. So break that down into things that are positive. So if you're looking at compliance, that's an easy one to flag, but usability and customer confidence and user confidence is also really, really key. And we've just come through a whole 2 years or 3 years of where everybody got out of the offices and organizations were scrambling to try and make everything work outside the office, at home, so their users could be productive. And so that's a really, really strong use case. And now we're in that situation where that precedent's been set. People, are going back to the office, but they're also working really flexibly. They're working from different devices. They're working in different environments. So really, zero trust in this context is about enabling the business to be more productive wherever they are. And so it's not about trying to sell, a restrictive security control mechanism to the C-suite. You've got to link it to their objectives, because these guys are going to be the people who are going to support your objectives, fund it potentially, be your stakeholders and champions within the board. So you've got to be able to speak the language of the C-suite and know what they care about and know how you're relevant to their objectives. Malcolm, what's your advice on that?
Yeah, that's a great example with the working from home side of things. We've always tried as an organisation to promote bring your own devices. It's never got to it because we couldn't secure it. We couldn't make it simple to secure the data within the bank and our organisation, preventing our DLP, for example, getting our data, preventing the data loss from happening within our most secure applications, getting that out into the external world. Don't want that ever to happen. With all the technology that's come across, and especially after COVID and working from home, we're starting to expand that use case. And being your own device use case, this kind of allows developers to come into the bank, not require a bank provided laptop, speed up into the bank developing. That allows applications to build more product, and bank becomes more productive. Also saves costs from sending out equipment that they might not need because they've already got equipment, they've already got a Mac or something they want to use, and it enables more productivity, and it improves our business model quite significantly. It keeps us in line with some of the fintech startups that are coming up. So yeah, that's a kind of a business benefit from our perspective. We like to promote and trying to get that through to our board members that aren't technically savvy.
Actually, the principles, that's a really good example, and the principles of Zero Trust are even more important when you've got, a variety of devices that may or may not be under your control. And so you really don't want that binary choice of this user can access this data or this service when you're in that environment. So that's where you really need to take into account the context, what they're accessing, what the environment is, what the risk is. And so that really, really helps. That's a great example.
Yeah,
definitely identity is a big thing there. You don't want engineers accessing, like Chris said, accessing a production device from a production application, and the infrastructure from a bring your own device. The data implications and loss to the bank, loss to the organisation is pretty huge there. So you with all the technology around now, you can quite easily restrict that access from a specific device or even a location going around. So even if, say, I wanted to go to like India or Israel, speak to Aqua, I could be restricted from accessing our production systems. But if I come back to the UK, fine, it's open.
Yeah, context is key. I remember a time where being onboarded to a financial services customer where I was handed 3 different laptops, depending on which environment I wanted to access. None of them were production. It was, and that was just as a consultant, not as a full-timer. That was a very heavy bag to carry around.
We're down to 2 at the moment, trying to get down to 1.
I wasn't going to name names, but that was a time in Lloyd's history where I think that was a required thing.
Yeah.
Awesome, guys. Rob, did you want to add anything else to this section of the presentation?
Yeah, I think I'd kind of start with the question of what's the optimal patterns just to ensure you've got the right level of security for the systems that users are going to access. And so Malcolm gave great context around that. Around should you be able to access a production system or any admin account really from a bring your own device? And the answer is in most cases, I'd say no. So having some idea about what you need to do from a basic level is really, really important. And this is one of the key kind of guiding principles that I have with Zero Trust. It's a balance. You've got to balance usability with productivity and risk. So you can't go and say, right, we're going to ban everything unless it's, absolutely within this really narrow set of criteria. I mean, you can do that, but your usability is going to drop. Your support from your user base is going to drop. And arguably, people are going to try and find ways around it, or the security policy is going to be challenged. So you need to be enabling productivity whilst maintaining that graded risk. And so, some kind of guiding principles here. Just avoid that binary choice. Combine your controls. So don't just rely on identity, and don't just rely on network centric controls. Those two areas should be aware of each other, and you should be using both. And then really focusing on use case as well. You've got machine to machine. So, you've also got human to application, which is critical, but you've also got, what are your services doing? If you have a security incident and you have somebody who is or a script or malicious software or a threat actor who's managed to gain access, are you aware of which services should be talking to which other services? So machine to machine communication, and why they should be doing it, and in what context they should be doing it. And that's really important as well. And then you've got the whole digital transformation thing. So, that's use case around, working from home, your own device, etc., and accessing applications you normally access in the office is really, really important. That's a really critical piece of or an example of where security enables productivity. So just remember that the technical principles are all going to be the same, but the organizational objectives that you have from different people and different use cases are going to be different. So you need to focus on the problems that you're jointly trying to solve together, and not to get bogged down in a whole, massive zero trust implementation that really, is going to take a long time to implement, and you're not necessarily going to see value from initially. You need to focus in on quick wins, and be flexible in how they're implemented. And when you migrate into cloud, a lot of those principles are already built in. So if you look at, signing API requests on AWS, we process, millions of signed API requests every second globally. And each one of those is individually authenticated and authorized. And then you look at, how do the services communicate together? And again, that machine-to-machine use case, use secure identity controls between those services. So we've got a security model that just governs the communication between AWS services. And then the other one is, IoT. How you're looking at traffic from IoT devices. When you implement that, make sure that those devices are being sent through secure device authentication, and you're using monitoring technology. You're using tools like GuardDuty, for example, is the AWS example. There's many others out there that can monitor what your accounts are doing, what your instances are doing, what are your workloads doing and users doing, and then you can bring those back into things to monitor and look for exceptions for. So start small with deliverable outcomes is probably my biggest piece of advice on how to get started.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the same for any kind of security shift, that you can spend months, years trying to come up with the perfect pattern for your organization. But by the time you come to implementing it, things have moved on. The threats out there have evolved, and you probably need to revisit everything again. So start small, and often looking at the tools you already have in place. Obviously, public cloud makes that great because you've got access to shared security model, all those things ready to go. Existing Aqua users, there are probably capabilities of the product that haven't been explored yet that can help you start that zero trust journey at the application level.
Well said. Thank you, guys. So excellent overview of what to prioritize, milestones to focus on. Let's turn our attention to some new additional concepts to consider. Rob, you had some really good insights here. Do you mind sharing with the audience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so for the audience benefits, we had a chat the panel participants and just kind of talked through some concepts that we found useful. And one of those was, bringing together RBAC and ABAC as access control. So just to explain the acronyms, because I hate acronyms, but it's shorter to say. So RBAC is rule-based access control. So that's really good because it's intuitive, it's easy for the workforce to understand. But as you get larger, as you get more policies, it gets really unwieldy. You've got scope creep in there. It's easy to audit, but it's kind of difficult to get that to scale, and then you've got to try and audit that policy and bring it all together. And so you've also got attribute-based access control. That's really, really flexible. So that's looking at other things outside of these typical rules around the context of what that access is. But again, that's really difficult to audit. Whereas RBAC's quite easy to audit. This is difficult to audit. It's really flexible. But again, you've got to be able to consider what to use and where. So we implement at AWS, and we've got a couple of services that do this as well, something called policy access-based control. So you're thinking, oh no, another acronym, great. So this is bringing together those two areas. So it's dynamic authorization. So it's using fine-grained policies in real time, and it's scalable. So actually, you can understand what's going on, and you can maintain it without having to make changes at the in the app code level. And you can really do some scalable things with it. So one of the key use cases is around creating security owners. It's something we do with our culture of security at AWS, is that every application owner owns the security for that service. Every person who has access to data is a custodian of that data. They have to make sure they have they're adhering to security policies and have controls around that with the help of our security department. With policy-based access control, you can actually delegate some of that access control and get input from the application owners. Who should be accessing this application? What data does it have in there? So therefore, do we want, for Malcolm's example, do we want somebody accessing a production service that has customer data on it from a device, in another country, or on a device that they own and we don't control? So it's a really, really good way of helping to externalize that authorization. And you can build apps faster with those zero trust principles built in. And then if you integrate your identity provider with that, you can then start to scale that beyond just the walls of AWS, for example, and you can start to have a policy that expands across all of your environments. So I thought that was quite interesting, and I'm not sure if the other panelists have kind of had some of those issues around scaling policies and analyzing what's going on.
It's definitely something that obviously Aqua is effectively in the zero trust framework, the policy engine, policy administrator, because everything that we do is defined in policies. And it's going to come back to keep it simple. We see a lot of challenges where customers try and, from day one, define all of the rules for everything in one go, or create a policy that applies to everything that's overly restrictive, or try and create, okay, we've got this team here doing that and this team over here doing that, so we're going to create policies for each of them. If you scale that up to an enterprise where they've potentially got thousands of teams, thousands of applications, how do you manage that? And how do you okay, there's now a global change that we need to apply to all of them. Policy and code makes that easier, but it's still a lot of work to do and validate and verify. So it all brings it back to, as Malcolm mentioned, keeping it simple, having kind of more of a global standard and dealing with exceptions, or categorization. If you've got apps using or handling customer data, you will probably want a special set of policies that apply to those that are going to be set at this high. Some tooling in dev that, Jenkins, classic, everyone's using it, unfortunately. It's not the most secure of products, but you have to give it a little bit of leeway, and it's just building things. So you're not going to apply that same standard to it. So yeah, keeping it simple is key. I don't know, Malcolm, I know Lloyd's, again, are doing a really good job in that arena.
Yeah, well, we're trying to make things more simple at the moment, going through various transformation projects with cloud. But yeah, what we're trying to do policy-wise is to have a base standard. So you've got minimum security, actually basically guardrails. But also, if there's a specific threat to AWS or Azure, for example, we can apply policies on top of that standard to say, for Azure customers, you need to have X, Y, Z in place. For AWS customers, we need to have applications. We need to have ABC in place. So it's understanding what's the minimum viable product from a policy standard point of view that we should be applying, and then building on top of that where needed, with the additional nuances on the back of that for each cloud product, cloud platform, service, etc. So it's we've gone through quite a significant threat modeling exercise with the different cloud providers, which has been interesting to be a part of, but also complex.
When you're but when you're developing those policies, are you kind of putting yourselves and embedding yourselves within the application and the user base? So you're seeing what a user should be able to do or is doing, and then building your policy based on that, or are you using the security principles and building from that way?
A bit both. You start off with the security principles. There's obviously CIS benchmarks available, loads of other benchmarks available on the web. Aqua provides stuff out of the box from that in that perspective. But then it's also, what else can you apply? Identify certain threats, and how would you combat them? Do you allow them? Do you just monitor? Do you prevent that activity from happening? I guess we're fortunate as well. We run applications ourselves, Aqua being one. So you can apply Aqua controls against Aqua. For instance, it's probably unwise to do that too heavily, but you could do. So we understand the principles needed from an application point of view, and we've gone through it. So we've gone through the stage where we've applied things policy too heavily, so heavily restricted policy, and we've been a small team managing Aqua, for example, being contacted every other day to be able to provide an exception. It's just it's finding that balance to say what should we be worried about compared to what can we be worried about from a security perspective, but also enabling the business to be able to progress and develop and grand scheme of things make money, because we wouldn't be here if the business wouldn't be making money. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Malcolm. All right, so time is flying by. We've got about 15 minutes left. So I know we wanted to leave a bunch of room for Q&A. We talked a lot about great things that you can do. I want to spend a tiny second on some pitfalls to avoid, basically what you shouldn't do. And Malcolm, I believe you had a couple little insights there when we linked up earlier to talk through this talk. Anything?
Yeah, the big thing from us is don't rush in. Our experience is, if senior, especially at the start of our cloud journey, senior management came in and said, "Oh, we want cloud." Great, okay, so we can stand up cloud quite easily. It's applying the additional controls that are required, and understanding the regulation that we're abiding by. So first thing for us is don't rush in. If you're standing up a cloud or standing up 3 clouds at the same time, for example, as we kind of did, create those patterns to say this is the base setup for for how we want cloud to work, and then build on top of that as and when you go. Fail fast is a pretty, a key buzzword for me. I like to keep trying until something works. But it's, yeah, if you can find that balance at the start of the process, it becomes a lot easier to deliver cloud within your organization.
Awesome. Thanks, Malcolm. Chris or Rob, do you have anything quick you want to add on this? Maybe one thing that you definitely want to avoid or just don't do. And then we'll move into the Q&A.
I was just going to add to what Malcolm was saying about don't rush in. I think what I tend to see with customers is that they're either very early in their cloud security journey, and they've got the time, the breathing room to, think about these things and get it in early, because it's a lot easier to apply something like Zero Trust when at the start. Doesn't mean that it's not impossible when you further along. I've definitely got a lot of customers that they've had that proliferation of cloud use, and now they've realized that they need to get a handle on it and how best to do it. So I think, don't rush in. If you can do that, great. If it's too late, it's not too late. And that comes back to Rob's points about small manageable chunks. Look at, pick an area to focus on. Be that identity is definitely, in my opinion, one of the more challenging areas of Zero Trust. But it doesn't mean you can't start with it or other things. Focus on devices, getting a handle on, bring your own device. If you can solve that problem, you're one step closer to ticking off that I am box. In parallel, look at the application side. Look at, that classification, ownership. Start looking at how you can build up that catalog of who owns what data is flowing through it, and actually put it on the programmer, the product management, the asset owner, to start defining what should this service be talking to. See a lot, microservices becoming that's kind of the de facto standard now, really, for application development. Don't just define one big blob of this is a set of microservices and all of these things talk to all these other things. Start breaking it down and make app teams responsible for specifying, okay, what do you need for those things to run, and what service should talk to what service and how and when, and across, what ports. Don't just open up to everything. So I think, it's definitely not impossible to bring Zero Trust to a large enterprise late in the day. You've just got to pick your battles.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that. We have a little bit of contrast, but speed and security are often seen, particularly in on-prem, as mutually exclusive. You can't move fast and stay secure. Actually, in the cloud, that's not the case. What we see in the cloud, unequivocally, is if you dive in and you don't consider security controls and good governance, good security practice, and policies like Zero Trust, then yes, you can move things quickly. You can get onto the cloud and you can expand. At some stage, that security governance is going to come back in, forced or otherwise, and it's going to slow things down. You're going to have to stop. You're going to have to do things correctly. Where we see customers really accelerate their innovation and transformation is where they consider security ahead of time. So they're considering how we deal with identity, how we implement, not the whole Zero Trust framework. That's massive. That's thousands of parameters and policies and systems and stakeholders. But they look at how they can put in place those principles into the cloud, and that accelerates cloud. And this isn't an official stat, but somewhere within 16% is the delta between of faster growth is a delta between not paying attention to security at the start and having good security policy and tools at the start of your migration, because that will then accelerate your migration. And you can engage the C-suite on this. We had a question earlier around how do you engage the C-suite. Teach them, train them, talk to AWS. If you're an AWS customer or thinking about being an AWS customer, ask us around our executive security simulations, because that teaches and helps the C-suite realize that actually if they pay attention to security, it's an enabler. It's not that we're not going to know people. We're not trying to stop the business from doing things. What we're trying to do is allow a business to go faster and more effectively. So, make sure you're focused on business objectives, and don't try and do the whole things at once. So avoid what I call zero trust paralysis, which is, you've got some analysts in that say this is the greatest thing you'll ever do, and you need to conduct this massive review, which is going to take 5 years. Okay, that's great, but you might never get there. So take some of those learnings early and deploy, simple, easy to deploy principles that have business value. And then make sure those tools are working together. Don't deploy stuff in silos, because that doesn't help anybody. So make sure your tools are working together to deliver more value.
You build up the application stack on cloud, don't you? You start off with simple applications, non-critical. You definitely don't put your big payment or your big crown jewel application on one of the first applications on. So
there's a cloud security, a cloud maturity model, which is really, really good, which kind of shows you, some of the things that you can start with. But I mean, every business kind of operates like this. You'll try first, and then you'll get more confidence, and then you'll start to build. And my advice is, and our security team's advice on this is always make sure you're including good security practice in that, because you will then accelerate your innovation, your transformation, and therefore business value, versus, being the people who have to come in at some stage and say, stop what you're doing because you're not doing it in a secure way. And those conversations never go particularly well for anybody involved. So, engaging early is the key.
Cody, you want to take the reins back, and we could keep talking about this for hours.
Yeah, I mean, I do see another question here. It says, is Zero Trust the bridge to support comfortable migrations towards cloud, especially with government agencies?
Do you want me to say that?
Go for it, Rob.
Yeah, I think it can be. I think bear in mind again that avoid zero trust paralysis. Don't avoid transforming and helping the business to grow because you haven't implemented zero trust in its entirety, which I'm not sure is possible. But so use the principles, use the guiding principles. There's services that you can use that have zero trust built in, and if you're migrating to AWS, then you already know that we're using a lot of these zero trust principles in our architecture that you're using, and so use the shared responsibility model to realize which elements of those that you're responsible for, which elements the cloud provider is responsible for. But yeah, absolutely can be really, really helpful to accelerate that, and that's the key thing, especially where you have a compliance centric organization, is make sure that you're using good security practice like zero trust principles, which will then help you to both justify and accelerate, because you can move the biggest application that you have into the cloud. You've still got to allow your users to access it, and so the best way to do that is to allow them to access it securely, which means that they can be more productive at a faster rate, and we see that across the board.
All right, and so what would be the #1 best step to get started?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think it comes down to what your priorities are as an organization and the type of organization you are. If you're worried about, let's say you're all about brand, and brand reputation is key. What are the key things that could happen that would damage your brand? Is that data loss, someone hijacking your website, denial of service, taking it down? And then from there, work back to, okay, what bringing it back to zero trust, which zero trust principles are the ones we should look at first to protect those, the crown jewels, as Malcolm refers to them. How do we protect that? And then the specifics, look at some real technical solutions to that. Well, actually, I say technical, really it's about people, process, and technology. And it could be that it's the first thing you need to work on is people. If you're dealing with a lot of external contractors or organizations, making sure that you can trust them not to lose the things that are important to you, and then bring it back to the technology. Rob, Malcolm, I guess, have you got more to add on that?
Yeah, I think that's, those three are the right thing, and in that order as well. What you probably won't want to do is, dive straight into which tool can do a job. You want to understand what, as you say, what assets you're critical, and specifically what processes you need protecting, and then you can start to look at what technology can do that job, meet that criteria. You don't want to dive straight into, oh, this tool looks great, this service looks great, well, let's get it in. It's not great if you can get it in and then it's not actually doing anything in the organization.
As a vendor, it feels weird to say it, but you need to, don't just go and buy a tool, understand the problem you're trying to solve first. So I'd say that's definitely the first step. And don't just look at zero trust and go, okay, we're going to try and do everything at once.
I'd absolutely agree with all of both of your points there. It's really, really important. So the key thing for me is don't try and do this alone. You need to understand your environment, you need to understand your users, and you need to understand your stakeholders. And without those three things, it's pointless implementing tools. So you need to understand how your users need to use their applications, what's important to your stakeholders so they can be your friends. You need those people to be your friends so you can get support for budget, for implementation, and justification for doing things and creating that security culture. And then when you choose your tools, be really clear on what your use cases are. Don't try and implement zero trust. You cannot implement zero trust with a product. As much as a lot of that is bandied around on different marketing materials, you need to pick particular use cases that are deliverable and have business value. So when you do that, that will help with your tool creation as well, because you might find that actually you can implement those using native cloud services. You might be able to implement those using tools you already have, or you might need a new tool. But I was speaking to a CISO at another financial services organization a few weeks ago, and he had a guiding principle that and this is a bit extreme, but if you're not using 80% of the capability of your tool, you're probably using the wrong tool. Or you've paid rather a lot for a tool for a very specific use case that could give you more value. So everybody's got too many tools. Find out what your tools do and how they support the objectives that you set with your friends and the application owners and the user space.
So we do have time for one more question, and Malcolm, I want to throw this your way. So while we are talking about tools, Malcolm, I do want to just ask, how has Aqua worked as a tool for you? What kind of changes have you seen in your workflows, or what impact has it had on your organization?
Yeah, we use Aqua primarily on our public cloud and private cloud instances. Since moving to those instances, we've been able to embed better engineering, developing principles. Before we had Aqua and capabilities that it provides. It was more at the end of the cycle, end of the development, end of the application about to go live. Oh, security come in, block. You can't do this, can't do that. Whereas with Aqua, we can now scan upfront ingestion and build activities, and then throughout the life cycle, into runtime, etc. Get that information, get that developing practices sorted up front, and then you start to get those practices better embedded into your organization, and start to hone in on those zero trust principles that we've been talking about throughout the life cycle, really. Not sure I've got anything more to add on that.
Awesome. Well, Malcolm, thank you so much. And Joe, Chris, Rob, thank you all so much for joining me today as well. I really appreciate the time it takes to not only hone in on your expertise, but to set aside a full hour of your busy schedules to come on to Techstrong Learning and speak with me. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
for having us.
Thank you.
I'd like to remind our audience that our session was recorded. So should you want to rewatch, or maybe this session was so invigorating that you do want to share this, you will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand. And of course, you can find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. The 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing are Kura Larasi M, Antonio P, Leela K, and Jamila S. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your email inbox to claim that gift card. It should make its way over to you in about the next 48 hours. But if you don't happen to see that email, check your spam folder just in case it got filtered out. I'd like to thank AWS and Aqua for sponsoring our program today. And to everyone in attendance, if you're still hearing my voice, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you hanging out with us on Techstrong Learning. And we do just want to ask for one more moment of your time for a survey that will pop up as soon as we close out. We do want to hear what you thought about our program today, or if you have any suggestions for a future program, do let us know as well. Regardless, we hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong Learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and Malcolm, Chris, Rob, Joe, thank you all once more.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.